Hello race fans, it's Peter Partee from Partee Racing. I've had a number of you clamoring for me to do a video on installation of Vanos units of the BMW S62, my baby. And so I'm going to do that today, finally. I have a particular way of doing it that I think is the right way of doing it. It's the best way to ensure that your timing is correct. It is not the easiest way to do it. And it does not involve leaving the spline gears in the Vanos. As you can see, we are starting with, this is a fully built S62 for a customer. We're just going to install the Vanos and time the motor, but we are starting with Vanos units that have been rebuilt, that have the spline gears in them already, and that's how we're going to install them. We're going to install them with the solenoid pack already bolted in, with the caps on, and with the spline gears fully inserted all the way back against the Vanos. That is installation position for the Vanos that you want. The other thing I want to make a note of is that whenever we rebuild Vanos, we make a very important change, and that is that BMW changed, you want to try and get a shot of this, changed the circlip that holds in the washer on the pump side of the Vanos. And this is the old version, and this is the new version. And as you can see, BMW changed it so as to eliminate these sharp edges on the exterior and instead move them to the interior there. Same over here. These sharp edges here, 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 and here, over time, will dig into this washer right here. And when it starts to dig into it enough, the pieces of that washer get inside the pump, and the pump spreads them throughout the engine, the pump malfunctions, and the engine dies. It has happened many, many times. That is why BMW quietly made this change. Many companies that are going to renovate your Vanos do not make this upgrade, and that is a critical error. We do it on all of our Vanos. It's just a matter of popping it out, taking out the washer, replacing it, popping it back in with the new version. These have already been done, but these, you should throw them away, like that. Don't install those on your motor, okay? Make me happy. So let's talk about where we're starting, right? First of all, the engine is at top dead center. How do we know that? Got it locked with the pen. OIT, right? Top dead center. Top dead center for what? For cylinder 1 on the firing stroke. That's what this is. So, how do you know that that's the case? Well, in part because you've got your cams locked as well. What do I mean by the cams being locked? As you can see, you have the cam slots in the cams appearing through the opening in the first cam cap here and here, and our pins drop right in and lock them in place. Same on the other side. All good. Got your slots in your windows, slot in your windows. So this is the position in which you want to install your Vanos. The other critical thing you have to do, see these gears? They have to be moved all the way clockwise. All the way clockwise. All the way clockwise. Why? Because as you insert the Vanos with the spline gears, they're going to rotate backwards. And if you're not starting with them all the way clockwise, then you are going to have limited and incorrect Vanos travel. What does Vanos do? Vanos adjusts the valve position and the range of the valve positions relative to the crank angle. And in order to have the right amount of adjustment during the right portion of the crank stroke, one has to start with these things all the way clockwise. Now, to be sure, when we insert the spline gears from the Vanos, they are going to move a little bit this way, a little bit counterclockwise, in order to catch the first tooth. And you're going to hear a lot of stuff online about the concept of there being a sweet tooth, a magical tooth that is the perfect tooth in which to insert the spline gears so that it does not move the Vanos gears backwards at all. This is, with all due respect to some friends of mine who I know subscribe to this theory, utterly false. There are no differences between any of these splines here and any of these splines here. These are all interchangeable, as are these. The only time you will ever have any kind of resistance or lack of resistance when you insert the Vanos into the spline gears is if particular gears have worked together in the past, or particular gears with particular indentations or what have you have worked together in the past, therefore slide together a little easier. That's it. So there's no sweet tooth. There may be a particular orientation where the gears go in a little bit better than the others. That's it. And you'll see how this goes. So let's get to this. Now, one thing you have to be careful of too is these O-rings. They love to pop out, especially on the upper covers that don't have the recessed areas for them. And one thing I'm missing, what am I missing? Everybody sees, there's Vanos control valve. So I'm gonna get some of those and install those really quickly, and then we'll come right back. I forgot to install our little Vanos oil control valves, so we're gonna install those. We've got new Vanos O-rings installed on them. We're just gonna put a little white grease, basically moly coat on them. O-ring grease just ensures that you don't ever hurt your O-ring. And we're going to insert them into Vanos right there. Okay, we've now got our Vanos oil control valves installed with fresh moly coat on the O-rings and the Vanos O-rings. Always good to make sure that you right before you start the installation process with Vanos, that every little thing is already done. You don't want to have to stop halfway through. So for example, also, I do this installation with the pencil tensioner installed. And now that I touch that, I realize it has not been torqued. So I'm going to torque it before I start this process. Why? Because you want everything to be on the motor and in the Vanos exactly the way it's going to be when the motor's running, when you time the motor. If you set the timing when the motor is in a different condition, then timing is going to be off by a little bit, because the tensioner will not be in the position that it is when the motor is running, because the Vanos will not have the end caps on them or what have you. Whatever change you have made that is different from what it's going to be like when the motor is running, when you set the timing, that will cause the timing to be off slightly. So try to replicate as much as possible the conditions the motor will be in when running. Everything in place, pencil tensioner torqued, Vanos solenoids installed, Vanos gears installed, everything exactly as it will be when the motor's running, when you do the installation and timing. Otherwise, your timing is likely going to be off. Okay, now folks, we're going to start the actual installation of the Vanos, and we're going to do it piece by piece. Our little Vanos installation screws. Again, about dead center, valve installed, gears all the way clockwise, and Vanos spline gears all the way up against the face of the Vanos. Oh, another wrong one. These units are actually interchangeable, of course, but you want the one with the exit on the bottom and the pump on the inside. So when you insert these things, you're going to have to do two things, right? One is you're going to have to rotate the spline gears until they actually interface. And here, let me get a good thing to use for that is a 90-degree angle pick. And you can just kind of rotate. There you go, locks in. Locks in. Now, oops. There we go. Sometimes better to do it with your fingers. And as you can see, now we've got the straight spline gears installed, but the diagonal spline gears here are still not interfacing with the spline hubs. So how do you do that? press Vanos unit up against, put a little pressure on the outside of it. Then on the exhaust side, you have a little hole right here that you can use to move the hub. And then here on the intake side, you have a little hole right here that you can use to move the hub. Sometimes you just have to push, sometimes you have to do it with your finger, but this is the way it usually works. Sometimes one has to start before the other. Usually it's the intake. So we move it just a little bit counterclockwise until, there you go. Did you hear that? See, I just moved the splined hub clockwise just a little bit and it caught the first tooth. Now I gotta do the same thing on exhaust. Put a little pressure on it. Voila. Now, don't proceed to jam your Vanos in and, install it. No, don't do that. Actually, I'm not sure I've got this all the way in. Let's see. Oh, I see. Now, I'm making a cardinal error. On the pump side, if you're having trouble getting the Vanos to go in, the spline gears to go in, it's probably because the prongs on your pump gear are not aligned with the holes in your pump disc. You have to make sure that the holes align with the pump disc. I'll show you on the other unit when we get it out. But then, push in a little bit, move the disc, not the spline gears. There we go. Then it will go in. And again, that's about as far in as you want to push it at this point, okay? Got a couple of screws. Make sure the thing doesn't fall out. One on either side. What you're leaving is about 5 millimeter gap between the face of the Vanos unit and the upper timing cover. It can't touch. Don't touch. It's a no-touch situation, like so many others. Now, this is an extremely important tool for this process. This is a fixed torque wrench at 12 Newton meters. That is the torque that you're going to want to use on the hub bolts. These are the 10.9 hub bolts from BMW. They're replacements for the prior 8.8s. And these are the critical ones. There are 6 on each hub. At least three will be visible at a time. And you need to tighten the 3 visible, and then you have to spin the motor over and tighten the other 6, the other 3 on each hub, and then spin it back over and check. But before you ever get there, you have to do what's known as pre-tensioning the hubs. What do we mean by that? What we're gonna do is we're gonna tighten 2 of the visible screws to 12 Newton meters all the way. This is where if I had a Sretton YouTube video guy, they would be speeding things up so you don't have to watch me do this. But I don't have that, so you have to watch. Now, I'll tell you exactly what this is doing while I'm doing it. This is doing what's known as pre-tensioning the Vanos springs and hubs. Inside these gears are the notorious S62 Vanos springs. They're Belleville washers, basically. And in order to ensure that they are tightened evenly so that they slip under the requisite degree of oil pressure when they're supposed to and not when they don't, you have to pre-tension them. You can't just go straight to the Vanos installation and tighten all of the requisite bolts to 12 Newton meters, spin it around, tighten the other 6, and then call it a day. one has to tighten them enough to where they settle and are evenly on each side tightened. And then you're going to crank it back 45 degrees to loosen it, so that we can then push the Vanos unit all the way in and tighten it. So again, what we're doing here is we're going to tighten all the way to 12 Newton meters. There we go. There's the click. There we go. And we're going to do it on both sides here. Just pick two opposite screws that you can access. Can't access that one, so I'll do this one. And click. Now, you will see that TIS specifies 10 Newton meters for these, but with the 10.9 volts, it's good to go to 12. I used to do 10, but the E46 M3, which uses the same springs, at least in my builds they do, we use 12 Newton meters without issue, and so I started using it here. So once you pre-tension bolts, at least 2 on each hub, then crank it back 45 degrees, 45 degrees, 45 degrees, 45 degrees. Now we can proceed to insert the Vanos attachment all the way. Get your Vanos attachment bolts. And I'm just going to run these in. Run the bolts in a star pattern. Evenly moving the Vanos forward. See, spline gears are going in the hubs very nicely. And if you're doing this right, you will end up seeing a little bit of hub at the very end. Vanos is all the way in, so what's the next critical step? Well, it's back to using your 12 Newton meter fixed torque wrench, and then tightening each of the 3 visible bolts, or as many as you can see actually, up to 12 Newton meter. And this time we're going to leave them there. There's no pre-tensioning going on now. Sometimes you can even get a 4th. And the more you can screw in, the better. So that makes it less likely that when you flip it over to top dead center firing, you get the other bolts, that there will be any slippage. Again, this is a wonderful little head that BMW sells for these tools, and really is just super thin, just the right size to get in here and do these bolts. Now, what we're going to do same thing on the other side and do, again, each of the 3 visible bolts. This is a little tight. We're going to do the 3 visible bolts, do the pre-tensioning, install it all the way. Then we will turn the motor over to top dead center overlap for cylinder 1, and then we'll tighten the other bolts on each hub. So again, make sure you're up against Vanos all the way, clockwise all the way. Slide in the straight gears. Oh, they went in pretty easily there, didn't they? So now you put a little pressure on it. There we go. And we're going to move this back just a tad and see if we can get the spline gears to interact. I think they already have. It's good. So now we'll try exhaust. There we go. That one went perfectly. I guess that's how some people would say I hit the sweet spot. But they're wrong. Okay, now, again, gotta move. If you're having a problem getting the intake to go all the way in, it's probably because you haven't rotated your pump openings to fit the drive lugs. These are the drive lugs right here. And they have to go in the openings in the pump. There we go. So again, about 5 millimeters. Now that installation went extremely smooth. That's the way it's supposed to go. Get a couple of bolts in so you can do the pre-tensioning. Okay, so now we have all of our visible bolts torqued to 12 Newton meters, but we're in top dead center firing in cylinder 1. We've got another stroke, top dead center overlap. So we need to remove our crank hub, remove our crank pins, turn it back over to top dead center overlap, and then tighten the remainder of the bolts. Then we'll spin it back over, and then we'll see if our cam pins drop, see if our slots in the cams align with the windows and the cam caps the way they do here. And if they do, then we know we've got good timing. If they don't, then we'll have to do some adjustment. So let's get to it. So this is kind of our first test to spin the motor over, make sure everything kind of seems and feels right. Watch the cams spin with the crank, because the Vanos are what connect the cams to the crankshaft. Without them, they just spin. So, or the crank spins freely of the camshafts. But when they're connected to the Vanos, they spin together. And that's how they should spin. So let's see. So far, so good. Looking pretty good. Feels pretty good. Now, I don't have spark plugs in this. If you have spark plugs in it, it will be a lot harder to crank. Sometimes I will put spark plugs in just to ensure that nothing gets in the motor, but not when I'm doing timing, because when I'm doing timing, I need to be able to move the motor freely spin. I don't actually need that here, but what I do need is my handy dandy torque tool. As you can see, we now have all these bolts right here, 1, 2, 3, that clearly are not tightened all the way. So we're gonna torque all these, and then we've got these two over here, and this one may be a little tough, but we'll get to it. We'll spin this over back to top dead center, make sure that our timing is close. Take a peek. Slots in the window, slots in the window, slots in the window, and slots in the window. Every one of them perfect. That is how you do it. Now, I need to make sure that I've got that one bolt that was difficult to reach fully torqued. Yeah, there we go. In fact, what I'm going to do is spin it over a little bit, gain a little bit more access to it. A little bit more. There. So again, if it makes you feel better to mark these once you've torqued them, fine. Again, I think that is a sign that you're not concentrating enough. But it does have utility if you are likely to have to start and stop, or if you're going to get interrupted. But if you have a good check procedure to make sure each of the bolts has been tightened before you're going to lock up the motor. Aha, you see we've got one over here, still left to go. Okay, so now we're going to spin it over a couple of times. Make sure that we're all good, and our timing is still good. Now we're top dead center overlap. We're back to top dead center firing. And what do we have? Cam slots perfectly in the windows. Perfectly in the windows, perfectly in the window, perfectly in the window. See how those slots are perfectly centered inside the window? The edges of the slot are right on the edge of the window. That is perfect timing, at least for stock. If you're doing a DP motor with custom timing, obviously, you're paying very little attention to those marks, and you're certainly not locking the cams in that position. So, this is a well-timed S62. It is good to go. Obviously, I've got some more Vanos hoses and the pressure block to install up front. And then I will proceed to install valve covers. And we've got some pretty nifty valve covers that we're going to put on this. I'll show you what we do is we convert to E46 M3 pencil coils. As you can see, these are not the stock valve covers, and they're not the stock ignition coils. But we make some modifications to this part of the valve cover, the stock valve cover, to provide, and then we manufacture this plate. I don't like the dowel there. We'll probably get rid of that. And then we put in these E46 pencil coils that just slide in over the spark plugs like that. We have a custom harness that we manufacture that goes up here, goes back over into your stock wiring harness, and we also give you a dwell adjustment for your ECU to change the dwell for the different ignition coils. But the advantage of this, first of all, is it's wicked cool looking. Second of all, it's super lightweight compared to the stock nonsense, which is super heavy coils, lots of bracketry, and then a huge coil cover that goes on top of it. The problem with all of that, in addition to weight, is how long it takes you to change a coil or a spark plug. Here, changing a coil, pop, pull, you're done. You want to change a spark plug, boom, right there. Spark plugs and coils can be changed with this modification in about 15 minutes. So, does it make any material performance difference? Probably not. But it sure does look cool, and it makes changing your spark plugs and your coils a lot easier, and it is lightweight, and like I said, I just think super cool looking. So this is going on this customer's motor. This was a brand new block from BMW that we used with BMW first oversized rings, which are 2 thou over, and just about everything on this is either new. We've got a block off kit with a welded up center opening in the thermostat housing, and then obviously the block off of where the heat exchanger goes. A little tech tip for you guys is to make sure when you're installing a block off kit like this, that you gouge out the internals of the valve up front. If you don't gouge out the internals of the valve up front, you're gonna have a problem. When you block off the heat exchanger, you have to take the guts out of the oil valve at the front. Otherwise, I don't know what would happen, but it ain't good. So that's how you install Vanos. Again, I think it's the right way. It is installing it in the form in which it's going to be run on the motor, meaning with the caps installed, with the solenoid installed and torques down, and with your pencil tensioner installed and fully torqued. And you might say, well, I don't remember any step, Peter, where you cranked counterclockwise on the crank against the direction of rotation in order to take up chain slack. You don't have to do that if you install your Vanos with your chain tensioner installed. Why? Because there will be no chain slack to take up. If there is, your tensioner is not doing its job. Your tensioner might need to be filled with oil. Generally, they come from BMW and they're kind of locked in place. You need to make sure that they're unlocked before you install them. And then usually they have enough oil in them to pump up quite nicely and tension exactly as they're going to when the motor's running. But if you feel like you need to fill it with oil, you can do that too. And again, that can make it a little hard to install. Muscle up, you can do it. So that's, if anybody has any questions or comments or outbursts of righteous indignation about what I've done here or what I haven't done here, I don't care. No, I'm kidding. No, please send me your comments. I'm always open to constructive criticism. Again, I think this is the way we have built, wow, well over 100 S62s in our day. Some race, mostly street, but probably, I don't know, 10 race. And we haven't had an issue with respect to Vanos timing yet. We did have one that cracked the crank in half because it had a crack in the crank that we didn't notice. But we had one that cracked the camshaft. Must have had a crack in the camshaft. But aside from those two things, we haven't had any failures. So we think we're doing it right, and I hope you got something out of this video. Thanks.